Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to tell you about my 5 favorite fiction books that I read in 2021. Now, normally, this is a top 10 video. Basically, since this channel got started, I've made top 10 books of the calendar year videos at the end of the year. But over the years, I've been reading more and more nonfiction. Like in 2021, I read more nonfiction books than I ever have in a calendar year. And I found that this year, I just didn't read enough fiction, nor did I read enough mind-blowing fiction to justify making that top 10 list. I would have to start dipping into some of my 4-star reads, and I just didn't want to do that. I only wanted to talk about the fiction books that meant the most to me this year. And this year, that means it's a top 5 list. But even though the number of books that I'll be discussing in this video is a little bit different this year, everything else is the same. The usual disclaimer applies. These are fiction books that I personally read in 2021. They weren't necessarily published in 2021, and this list is ranked. I'll be speaking about the books in reverse order, so I'll start off by talking about my 5th favorite fiction work of the year and work my way up to discussing my number 1 favorite fiction book of 2021. So that 5th favorite work of the year is actually the book I started off the year with. I read this book on January 1st, 2021, and it has stayed with me the entire year long. It's Hausfrau by Jill Alexander Essbaum. This book is essentially a modern Anna Karenina retelling. We follow this character named Anna, of course. She's a dissatisfied American housewife living in Switzerland with her husband and children. She's taking German language classes in the hopes that learning the language of her new country will help her feel more at home there. She is seeing a therapist to try to determine where this despair she feels is coming from. She's also having an affair, and we find out that it's not her first. I have to say that I know this book isn't going to be for everyone. It hasn't been for everyone by the looks of its Goodreads page, and I totally understand that. This is a very intense book. It is not a feel-good work of fiction in the way that other books on my list this year definitely are, so stay tuned if you like those types of books. This one, it's highly sexual. It uses very highbrow language, a lot of language about language learning, since Anna is taking these German lessons. The author uses the language about language to communicate all the different things that Anna can't tell us, doesn't have the words to tell us, doesn't want to tell us about the way that she's feeling inside. I thought that was so brilliantly done. So even though this book isn't everyone's cup of tea, that doesn't stop me from being deeply impressed by this book. And I have been deeply impressed by this book the entire year long. In the 4th spot on this list is a much lighter book, but it's another one that really stayed with me after I read it, and it also just so happens to be the best romance book I read in 2021. It's called Evie Drake Starts Over by Linda Holmes. This is a slow and steady book about this woman, Evie Drake, whose husband dies right before she was planning on leaving him. And this puts her in a really uncomfortable position in her small town in Maine because everyone sees her as this bereaved widow who is devastated over the loss of her husband, but she can't really tell anyone that that's not really the case because he was not very nice to her and she was not in love with him anymore. So she's feeling a sense of loss, but it's not the one that everyone thinks she's feeling. And on top of everything else, her late husband didn't have life insurance. So Evie Drake is now broke. And in order to not lose her home, a friend of hers suggests that she gets a roommate, have someone move into the house and help her pay the bills. And there's this professional baseball player, a former professional baseball player who has lost his ability to pitch. It's been a very embarrassing situation for him. He wants to escape the limelight for a little while, get away from it all. And a sleepy town in Maine sounds like just the right place to do that. So he moves in with Evie, and this being a romance book, of course, they hit it off. But what makes this book so special, what makes it feel so realistic, is how gradually that happens. I really like the romance genre. I've been reading more and more romance books over the past few years, and I've been really enjoying them. But I have to say that the whole "I just met you, but now I would die for you" thing that some of them do gets on my last nerve. It doesn't feel like anything that could happen in the real world, and I like my romance books to be on the realistic side. And it also has never struck me as the way a lasting relationship is born. And that's important to me in a romance book. And this book, even with all of its improbabilities, this felt like something that could actually happen. Evie and Dean, the professional baseball player, they start out as acquaintances. They slowly start to trust each other and confide in each other. They both have their own things going on. Evie Drake lost her husband. She's financially struggling. Dean lost his profession. He lost the ability to pitch, and that's a big problem for a professional baseball player. So they have their own things keeping them busy, but they confide in each other about those problems, and they slowly grow to care about one another. It just felt like something that could actually happen. That element, plus all the changing friendships in this book, made this book feel so true to life, and it made it so much more meaningful. A lot of the romance books I read, they're kind of like cotton candy. They're delicious, I inhale them, but they lack lasting value. And this one was entirely different. I still think of lines from this book on a regular basis. They just pop into my head. The third book on this list is Mary Jane by Jessica Anya Blau. This book is set in the 1970s. It's a coming-of-age tale about a 14-year-old girl who works as a summer nanny for a very eccentric couple in her neighborhood. Mary Jane, the main character of this book, is being raised very conservatively, and so she has to hide a lot of what happens in this household in which she's working over the summer from her parents. The father of this household is a therapist, and he invites this celebrity couple to come stay in their house for the summer to avoid the limelight while one person within that couple is dealing with addiction issues. And the group of them over the summer form this little family. And you can tell it's the type of summer that will never leave Mary Jane. It is going to become a part of who she is in the future. This book is just as charming as they come, basically. I thought it had depth, but it was also great fun to read. It also worked particularly well as an audiobook, if that's what you're into. I just thought it was a real winner, and I said as much in the review video that I made for it earlier this year. I'll link that for you in the description box below and up in the cards if you'd like to hear more about it. Now, my second favorite book on this list is a work of fiction, but it's not a novel. It's actually a short story collection from one of my favorite authors, Lily King. Her new collection called 5 Tuesdays in Winter absolutely blew me away. And I don't even particularly like short stories. This is a collection of 10 very different stories that all read like Lily King fiction, is the best way I can put it. One of the stories really reminded me of her latest novel, Writers and Lovers. That was one of my favorite novels of 2020. Another one reminded me of an earlier novel of hers called Father of the Rain, which I also read this year. It just felt like her usual style. And as such, her skill of being able to make you feel like you know a character in just a few short words was on full display in this book. I felt so close to so many of these characters that I wanted these stories to be turned into full-length novels because I wasn't ready to say goodbye. I can't say too much else about this one because I actually reviewed it for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm a freelance book reviewer in addition to being a booktuber, in case you don't know that about me, but that review hasn't run yet. As soon as it does, I will link it in the description box below so you can read more of my thoughts on this book. But in the meantime, I will say this. If you like Lily King's novels, then you will likely also really enjoy this short story collection. But even if you've never read any of her work and you're like me and you don't normally read short story collections and you want to read one that will convince you to read more, this is the one. And now it's time to talk about my favorite fiction book of 2021. And it's actually the one that I predicted would take the top spot because I loved it that much when I read it. Out of all of the books on this list, this is the only one that's not just a yearly favorite, it's a new all-time favorite. It's Zora Neale Hurston's classic novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God. I knew nothing about this book when I picked it up. I don't know how that's possible. This is a classic work of literature, but I didn't know anything about it. And I'm actually really glad that ended up being the case because it allowed this book to just happen to me. In this book, we follow a Black woman named Janie living in Florida in the 1930s. There are 3 different men who come into her life with whom she has very different relationships. And throughout her life, she never stops seeking out passion and personal fulfillment. She is not the type of person who will ever be satisfied with just a comfortable lifestyle, with good enough. She wants to experience all that life has to offer. She wants a type of love that is going to consume her. And if there's a price to pay for that, she's willing to pay it. This book is so beautiful and so moving. It goes in completely different directions than I expected it would, which kept the reading experience so entertaining and exciting, which feels like exactly how Janie would have wanted things. There are lines in this book, these little nuggets of wisdom that Zora Neale Hurston includes, that I now employ in my day-to-day life. I use that to inform the way I move through the world. I just can't say enough wonderful things about this book. I fell in love with it basically immediately, and I highly doubt I'll ever fall out of love with it. It's a new favorite classic, and without a doubt, it's the best work of fiction I read in 2021. Right after I read this book, I made a video comparing it to its movie adaptation. I'll link that for you in the description box below and up in the cards if you'd like to see that. But also in that video, I spoke about what inspired me to finally pick up this book, and that was the candle that my friend Amanda at North Avenue Candles, where I now work, she made a candle inspired by Their Eyes Were Watching God, which is being added to her lineup. Very excited about that because it's a great scent. But it is so wild to think that I read this book because my friend made a candle inspired by it. Pretty fitting for a very strange and very unexpected year. I'll take it. So those were the 5 best fiction works that I read in 2021. All of these books and everything else I mentioned in this video will be linked in the description box below. Also in the description box, you can find links to all the videos I've made in prior years discussing my fiction favorites in case you'd like to hear about even more great fiction books. And if you would like to keep up with what I'm reading and writing about right now, at the bottom of the description box, you can find links to everywhere you can find me around the internet, including Goodreads and Instagram, where I'm the most active. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks for another wonderful year. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.